Hi everybody, welcome back. On today's episode of building the Stug B here, when we last left you guys, we had put on the decals, decals. We'll say decals from here on in. Decals. And we were fighting with the, if you remember, we had a bit of an issue with the Balkenkreuz here that separated when I was cutting it out. And I had not followed my own advice and mucked up the back, the Death's Head symbol on the back of the smoke discharge unit here. So I since gone back and fixed that up. I was able to, I didn't have to remove the decal. I was able to fix it up with just some red and black paint, so that worked out well. And I've given everything another gloss coat and then given it another matte coat per the instructions that I had given at the end of the last episode. And now what we've done is what I've done, I guess, is I've progressed on to the weathering, or the true weathering, which is adding the mud and whatnot. So I've kind of finished this side of the vehicle. So I've got the road wheels on. I've done the weathering on the side here using, and I'll talk about this through the course of this episode, that's what we'll focus on. I've used some textured Vallejo earth, which is kind of it's an acrylic product. But you can use any of the MIG or AK textured earth products, and I've kind of stippled it on the side here, and we'll get a bit of a close up later when we get into actually doing the weathering. And I've stippled it for two reasons. I've elected to go with this as opposed to just using pigments. So one is that this build is going to have a heavier application of mud on it because of the geography that the vehicle served in. As opposed to what we did with the AMX-13. Remember, the AMX-13 was serving in the Golan Heights, not a lot of moisture and whatnot there, at least so the theory goes on my part. So for this one, I've decided to go back and weather it a little bit more. So I wanted to create a little bit of texture, which this does, because it is a textured product, and you just simply stipple it on and then let it dry. And then the second reason for using it is it gives a little bit of depth, because it's kind of a dark, wet mud color, as you can kind of see here. You'll see closer up when we get in, Robert gets in closer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go over this with pigments, and then start staining the pigments with some of the AK or MIG enamel products here, like their mud and whatnot. And then what I did at the end is I also flicked some specks on. To give it, again, the effect of things splashing up and whatnot on the side of the vehicle. The other thing I've done is I've gone and I've painted the tools. So I've completed, and again, we'll get closer in, I've completed the axe, and I've completed the barrel cleaning rods with the exception of the tip here. I need to put some more work on that a little bit more. But I've done a base coat on the shovel, and I've done this winch thing. I'm not sure what you would call that, but there's a crowbar here that I haven't done. So we'll talk about painting the tools on. We'll start with that first before we get to the actual weathering part. So so we'll kind of when we get into things, I'll talk about the specific pigments and products that I've used, and I've got some tips on how to get the acrylic paint to work even to flow even a little bit better. So we'll get a little bit close in. And then I just wanted to show these to start. So these are the tracks that we're going to be using. I think I showed these in one of the first episodes. These are the Master Club resin tracks. And I've managed to put them together, and it took me 95 links aside. That's right, 95 links aside. And very nice. You can see they're completely workable. They look good when they're on the tank, when they're on the vehicle. But are they as good as their metal equivalents? I don't know, the detail's pretty good, but they are a little fragile, and I broke a number of links and a number of pins, because you've got two types of pins. You've got one with the kind of like a cotter pin through it, and you've got the head of the pin that goes on one side. And from the best that I could tell, and somebody out there may correct me, but the best that I could tell is that the cotter pin side was on the outside, so that I guess the crew could get to it if they needed to, and then the head of the pin was on the inside of the vehicle. So for example, on this side, the pins would always face the outside of the vehicle, the cotter pins, so the kind of the larger pin that you put in here. But how many of those snapped off into perpetuity as I was using tweezers to kind of get a hold of them and put them in. And the other thing too is I had to drill out each one of these things. And thank goodness for that Tamiya power drill that I have. It's that little battery operated drill, because that really saved me. But you have to be careful with that, because if you go too far, you can kind of snap the whole track. So, but fortunately, I guess Master Club realized that this is a very strong possibility, so they give you lots of extra. So if you do lose a lot, or you break a lot, you've got more than enough to complete the tracks. And I've actually got enough if I wanted to do the tracks on the front here, I've got more than enough to do that as well. Now to talk about that, I think I mentioned I was going to put tracks here, spare tracks, because again, some of the reference photos that I had. But I can get the track in, depending on the way it is, I can get the thin part in here, but I can't get the thicker part on the other side. So I'm struggling with that, so they may not go on, just for the sake of timing and whatnot. But I'm still kind of working with that, so maybe we'll get to that in a future episode. But there's a good possibility we're not going to have any spare tracks here on the side, or on the front. But yeah, let's get in close, and I'll show you what I did with the tools and how to give them a nice realistic looking wood grain texture. Okay, so for the tools, what I do is these are my go-to colors. These are from the Panzerace's line of paints, and they're the old wood and new wood, oddly enough. And one's a little bit, has a little bit more red in it, and the other one has a little bit more gray in it, I guess. And I also I use this for the wood portion of the tools, and then for the metal portion I use this black gray. And what I do is I don't use them out of the bottle, is I add a couple of things to them. So one is I add a little bit of the Vallejo Airbrush flow improver. So this is kind of like a leveler. So it's got a kind of a retarder, I guess, and it has the effect of smoothing out the paint. And it may take a couple of coats, but you get a nice level, bubble-free finish. And then I also add a couple of drops of this MIG Ultra Matte Varnish. And what that does is that makes sure that knocks any glossy part of the paint back, so you get a nice flat finish, which is what you're going to want for putting on the oil stain. And then what I do to create, so once that dries, so I've already done that on this. So I've already painted, if we look at this, if we look at the shovel here, I've already painted the handle. So I've used, in this case, I use the new wood color here. It has a little bit more red on the cleaning rods and on the axe. And then I elected to, again, just to change it up and have a bit of variety, to go with the old wood color here on the shovel. And then for the metal part, I use the black gray. And again, the same for all three applications. You add, almost equal parts of the, so 1 part or 1.5 parts paint, 1 part airbrush flow improver, and 1 part matte varnish. And that really knocks back, that kind of kills any gloss and gives you a nice flat finish, which is what you want. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to do the metal part. And for metal, I like to use a combination of a couple of pigments. So I like to use this gunmetal color from MIG, which is very nice. I mean, you can use graphite too, I guess, but this is more convenient. And then I have a slightly lighter color of the polished metal here, which I use to kind of do the edges. And it's a little bit, so this is kind of a darker silver color, and this is kind of a lighter silver color. And what I use to apply them, and I got this tip from a video that MIG did online, is he uses what's called a rubber brush. Now this is a shaping brush that has kind of a silicone tip, and you can find this at your local art store. And they're used for shaping clay, I'm assuming. But the other application they have for us is they're really good at picking up pigments and applying them in a specific area. And for example, this crowbar here, which is all metal, just like this winching piece here, I painted in dark gray and then went over it with a combination of these two metal pigments using this brush. I'll show you how to do that. Maybe we'll do that first on here and here, so we can get right into it. So simply pick up, and what I do is I just pick up a little bit of, and I just use the bottle cap to, maybe we'll take a little bit off, because you don't need a lot. You buy one of these things, they'll last you a lifetime. And I do is I simply you can see, like if you tried to do this with a Q-tip, I mean the Q-tip has hairs on it and whatnot, and it may get stuck and pull. The nice thing about this is that it's not going to get stuck on anything. So again, kudos to Meg for coming up with this. I would never have thought of it. But as soon as I saw the video online, I ran to my local art store and picked up one of these things. So it's almost like you're using like a pencil. So you can kind of see now, hopefully we can, yeah, so you can see that there's a nice metal shine to it that wasn't there before. Now if I go and do the shovel, or the head of the shovel, see how easy that is. It just, you get this nice controlled application. Now in the past I used to use those little cleaning swabs that you get from Tamiya, the same ones I was using to kind of push the decals around in the last episode. Old habits die hard. But I find this is much more controlled and just easier, and there, done. Very simple. Now what I might do, just to create a bit of a text or a layered effect, is kind of clean off here. And then go in and pick up some of the lighter color here. So this is the polished metal, as opposed to the gunmetal, so kind of a lighter silver, or more of a true silver as opposed to like a gunmetal. And just catch the highlights. And just like, you're almost like dry brushing with it. There you go. Easy peasy. And then what I'll do afterwards is I'll get some pigment as if the shovel was used. And I'll probably chip the holder here, because as the crew would take the shovel in and out, they would, you know, kind of scratch this up a bit, and I would see some wear and tear. And maybe we'll do a little bit on the crowbar here. Just catch, like again, you're just trying to catch the edges here just to give it a bit of pop. That's all you're doing. Easy peasy. And again, with the crowbar, I might go and put some, I kind of did the similar thing with my Panther. I might go and put some dirt, as if it's, you know, it's been off the vehicle and used, which, you know, these things would, as the crew was moving around from one action to another, they would, you know, they would probably have opportunities or needs to pull these tools off and use them. Huh. That looks pretty good. And for the metal, so for all your metal tools, or metal parts of your tools, and I kind of did the same thing here on the for this S clamp or S hook. I used so I painted this dark gray and then went over it with a combination of the two pigments, the gunmetal and the polished metal, and then the same thing with the clippers here. So easy, 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 easy. So that's that. So the next thing we'll do is now we'll attack the wood grain on the shovel. And what I like to use is you can use any suitable brown oil paint, but this is kind of one of my favorites. This is probably the first Abteilung oil paint, tube of oil paint that I've ever purchased. And it's the wash brown, So it's kind of like a mid to dark brown, as you can see here. So it's really good for doing oil grain. So what I do is I get a fine brush, and you don't need a ton. So for this, I don't bother. I don't know that I'd put this on a piece of cardboard. And because this is such an old tube, a lot of the linseed oil is kind of leached out, I guess. So it's kind of already pre-done, which is nice. It's one of the advantages of having these older tubes. And then what I do is I simply put just like right up against the clamp and right in here, just little spots of paint, oil paint. Like so. And maybe in here a bit. And maybe one in the middle. Okay, so then what I'll do is I'll clean this off. And then I'll get another brush. And I'll just moisten it with odorless thinner. So again, you're just trying to get most of it off. A busy morning at the store here today. It's good. And then what you do is you just drag sorry, Rod, I'm making you move around here, but that's not. Hang on. Here, let's do that. And then just dragging this. There's some activity going on here. So you just kind of pull this, and you create a bit of a wood grain texture. So you see it darkens the base and gives a nice wood grain finish. Easy piece, that's all it is. So I might go back after this and maybe add a few more. You know, you can always add a little bit more and create the wood grain, but if you look at this axe here, that's kind of the effect that you get. So as simple as that, very, very easy to do. Okay, so the next thing we'll do now is we'll start attacking this side here with pigments. Okay, so now on to the pigments. And I've started a couple of things. So I've started applying some off camera just for the sake of timing. So here I've applied my trusty X28 thinner as a fixer, and you can see there's some tide marks here. So we'll deal with that. Very easy to do. We've talked about that in the past. Here I've just applied some pigment, so I haven't fixed this part yet. I did want to talk about, and I think I mentioned this in one of the previous episodes, where I was going to paint the white borders here, and I said I might do that on camera, but I didn't. And I just wanted to talk about that for a brief minute. So what I ended up doing is I ended up spraying, so I ended up masking these off with just Tamiya masking tape. And then I applied some scratching fluid from MIG. So I applied a couple of coats of that, and then I sprayed some Tamiya XF2 matte white, just thinned with water, and then that gave me the border. And then what I did is I went after it and chipped it and scratched it with by applying some warm water and kind of working it off. And so that's kind of the what's left of it here after I've done that. And then this also has that acrylic mud that I put on, and you can see here with all of the weathering and the mud that we're doing, you can just barely tell there's a trace of one there. It shows up maybe, or I guess probably the same here on the front. You can barely tell there's a trace of it there. So all that to say is that it doesn't have to be a terribly precise application, and the chipping came off a little bit more strongly than I was going for, but again, with all of the mud and whatnot, it's not going to make much of a difference. So in hindsight, I might have been able to apply the decals, but you wouldn't have gotten that chipping effect. But you lose, to be fair, you lose a lot of it under here. But okay, anyway, learn for next time maybe. So now getting back to the pigments, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue to apply. So, before I do that, I should talk about what pigments I'm using. So again, kind of the rule of three. So we've got the Europe Earth, which is MiG 3004. We've got the Light Dust, which is MiG 3002. And we've got the Airfield. Now, Airfield Dust is a real nice color, good mid color here, which is MiG 3011. And I think they brought this out for aircraft modelers to put on their tires and whatnot, to the extent that they want to weather. So, but very nice color. So again, I've mixed them up in a trusty plastic shot glass, and with an old brush, you simply go and you pick up some pigment. You don't need a lot, and then I just start stippling on it. You can see here. Here's the mud that I applied previously. So I'm just going to stipple the pigment over that. Very simply. Now there's a little bit of dropping here. A little bit here. Oops, my road wheel fell off. No polycap on the idler wheel. And I think somebody asked me in one of the comments, and I apologize for not getting back to you. But probably by the time this video comes out, I will have come back and answered that comment. So, so somebody asked me if I filled, because there's a lot of knockout marks and whatnot here on the inside of the track. And I didn't. And the reason for that is that I knew I was going to put mud there, and I used that as kind of a cheap way. I kind of cheated a bit, I guess. I used that as a bit of a cheap way of applying or dealing with all of them. You know, if somebody were to lift it up and look underneath. But to be fair, once the tracks are on, you're not going to see any of this, because the tracks do get up fairly close there. And we'll look at that in the next episode. But yeah, so just kind of continue to apply the mud. And you're just kind of working in with an old stiff brush. Just kind of work it in. Now what you can do to deal with these tide marks is you can simply go in and just apply more pigment over them. So you can see the tide mark back here has disappeared. And then you're done. Like, I think this part back here is done. So I've gotten rid of the tide mark. I've got a nice kind of a dusty effect. I'm not going to do anything more to this part in terms of pigments. So I'm just going to carry on. Just go around the vehicle, wherever you've got the... And again, you're kind of doing a bit of a mapping exercise with the acrylic mud that you put on there before. And again, I think the Vallejo, and I stupidly neglected to put the, or to bring the jar with me today, but it's just, you can use that, like even though the Tamiya has their textured earth products, you can use that. Anything that has a bit of a texture to it. Some of them are acrylic, some of them aren't. Like I think the MiG ones I thought were acrylic, but they're not. They're actually, there, maybe a little bit more on the front here. Again, once the sprocket is on here, you're not gonna see too much of what's here, but okay. And then let's move to this. So again, I've got a bit of a textured earth here on this. I'll just put that on, and the same thing. And again, the nice thing about using that textured earth, as opposed to doing this straight on the, not having it, is that it gives something for the pigments to bite into and grip, which is what you want. There you go. Maybe that one will try and leave a little bit more of the white. And then again with your, and I'll just, again, it goes to show how efficient this is. So this is how much this is how much I have left, and there's more than enough for in this bottle to do anything I would do here, plus, because it's, let's move this over. So we got some, we'll go back and fix that up after. So you're just touching it and just let capillary action do its thing. And then if we flip this over, so I fixed everything up to here, so I'm just going to go and fix, and you can see I did the bottom of the vehicle. Again, the bottom of the vehicle is always a great test bed for practicing stuff on. And then do the top. Just like that. And you can see just how as you apply it, there's kind of, the dry pigment just kind of sucks it up. And you are done. That's it. So what I like to do sometimes is, because as much pigment as it looks like there is on the vehicle now, when this dries, it's going to look like there's a little bit less. So what I like to do is, while it's wet, just tap just a little bit. And again, that just kind of builds it up a bit. Just tap, tap. Now the reason why I don't dip my brush in there, because as soon as I put it back into the dry pigment, it's going to clump everything up, and so you don't want to do that. But just give it a bit of it, and you don't need a lot. I mean, you can see here, look at this is how much I'm picking up. So I'm just tapping away here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is do this. I'm going to flip this over and hopefully not drop the vehicle. I have to admit, off camera I was doing this, and I did drop the vehicle and snapped off the periscope that's fixed to the main gun. So I have that in my jar of spare parts there. I'll fix that off camera just with some super glue, I guess. But again, so I'm going to get my finger out of there, Rob, so you can see. I'm just tapping. That's all you really need to do. Okay, so we'll let this dry, or take a hairdryer to accelerate things, and then we'll come back and see what we've got. Okay, so we've applied the hairdryer to accelerate the drying time. So this is what we have. So you can see that the pigment looks a little darker, is a little bit less than it was, and we have these tide marks, the same tide marks we had on the back tail end here. So what I'm going to do is simply look at addressing those tide marks. I'm just going to have just a little bit of pigment, a little bit less than that, and just kind of blend those in. Maybe a little bit more pigment there. There you go. So again, still in a kind of a stippling motion. Sorry, Robert. Let's grab a little more secret sauce mix here. Now the other thing you could do too is you could kind of go over it with, you might be able to get some, you blend it with some XS20, but that's a little bit dangerous. This is a much safer way of doing it. Is just and this you don't like this you don't fix. Just like we haven't touched this part back here, so you don't fix that. You just kind of let it. There, I think your tide marks are pretty much gone. do you think, Robert? It looks okay. So just a little bit of the gray showing through. Just anyone, you want to try and make it consistent. So again, same thing as this side here, just a little bit of the gray showing through. What we should also talk about is the road wheels. Let's do that. So here's the while we're talking. So here's the front. So here's kind of the finished product in the front here. So again, base coat of the first layer is that acrylic mud, that Vallejo earth. Then same thing, go over it with the pigments and the exact same thing I did. You just saw on the side here. Then you can apply some washes or some of the enamel, like the dark mud here. We're going to use this momentarily, just to give it a bit of depth of color. And then I did some streaking with, this streaking I did. I used a bunch of things. So I used Panzer Gray. So maybe we'll do that a little bit on the side here. I'll show that. We haven't talked about the streaking yet. And then what I also did is I used a thin, flat brush. And just picked up some pigment and just used the pigment to streak. So you can streak with anything. You can use the specific premixed convenience products. I've used oil paints in the past. You can use whether it's these oil washers, which are uber convenient, or just strict oil paint. Just drag it down. You can use Humbrol paints, paint them in, and then before they fully dry, just kind of work them in with a wet brush. Same type of thing. So that's kind of the finished product there. And that's while we're here. Sorry, wrong brush. While we're here, let's deal with that tide mark there, and then let's look at the back. And the back looks pretty good. I don't think we're going to touch that too much. And a little bit more of the border showing, but that's going to get when we start doing some splashing and whatnot. That's when you're going to lose a bit of that. So I think from a pigment standpoint, I think we're good. Maybe do a little bit more on the front here. Maybe do a little bit, maybe in here too. Now this stuff I would fix. So I'll just put and same thing here. And then might go over it with a little bit more. So you can see this is a very, and again, I think I've talked about this in previous builds. It's a very iterative. You can go kind of back and forth. If we wanted to do some streaking, you could here. I don't know that you necessarily need to, but we will do some streaking, like similar. There has some subtle streaking here, just to muck up. Because the Balkan Croix here is so bright, just to kind of knock it back a bit. And then, just as you can, like, to get the same type of effect here, you can just kind of, or you can use oil paints. So I'll show how to do that in a minute. But when you got to try and make your build consistent. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, while that's drying, so I started doing some road wheels here. And so I haven't, I took the hairdryer to them a little bit, but they're still in the process of drying, but I've saved a couple here. And again, all you're doing, same thing. Get a little bit of pigment on your brush, and then you just kind of, a little bit more than I wanted. Anyways. Save the pigment like that. And I have to say, like, with the nice thing about the Panzer Gray and the way we've done it here, where it's kind of, it's got a bit of a blue tinge, and I know people will say, well, there was, realistically, there was no blue tinge in the Panzer Gray. And I would say to those people, yes, that's technically accurate, but I look at modeling as a bit of an art form, and I think there is. And again, everybody's going to have some people are are going to want to stick to the book in terms of the colors. But I look at modeling as more of an artistic exercise or hobby. At least that's how I approach it. And I think let's do these smaller ones too. And I think part of what, like if I painted this all pans are gray, and I didn't modulate it or didn't filter it, it would kind of look like a lump of coal on the table. So you don't want that. I don't think and again, some modelers are kind of by the book on the colors, and I don't know who started. I guess Mig started this. Mig's kind of the pioneer, and a lot of his Spanish brethren is that they make the vehicles look. They try and compensate for that scale effect by modulating and doing different colors on different panels, slightly different variations of the base color on different panels, and I think that makes a model pop. I mean, I really, when you look at it on the, if you go to a contest, a model show, and you see a bunch of models on the table, and you put one that has, that's kind of strictly to the book by the, the colors, all pans are gray and little to no modulation, and then you put it next to, something that, that has that, that art. Oops, that's a bit more. Let's see if we can suck some of that back. That's going to take forever to dry, Robert. And you put it next to one that has been modulated and has the different color filters, and the pans are gray has a little bit of blue in it. It's going to pop. Like I think if you put this next to just a straight one, this one looks like a miniature version of the real thing, and the strictly pans are gray one looks like a bit of a toy next to it. So, but again, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody does this for has their different aims in doing this, or get different things out of it. So, I'm certainly not going to be one to attack anybody or talk disparaging about it. I just think it looks better. Let's do our drive sprocket. Same thing, just work your pigments in. And don't forget, boys and girls, the inside too. So I haven't done the insides of these, but I've done the inside of everything that's on the vehicle. Do the insides, because if you don't, it's not consistent. And if you are the type of person that likes to take your models to shows and enter them, any judge that's judging your model, that's worth their salt. If you've weathered it, they're going to look underneath, or they're going to look and see if they can. Especially if you go to an amp show where you get 4 of your peers judging your model, and they rotate it. They've got lights, they've got flashlights. They're looking at it. One of those 4 judges is bound to notice that if you haven't weathered the inside of your road wheels the same way as you weathered the outside, one of them is bound to pick up on that, and that's going to cost you. But again, model shows and judging aside, just for the sake of consistency, you should do that. So I was getting back. Oh, sorry, I kind of went off on a major tangent there. So I was talking about. I think the point I was going to make, or I was trying to make, before I got off of my soapbox there on modulating and whatnot, is that because of the blue tinge to the Panzer Gray, and because of the kind of slight reddish tinge to the mud, or brownish tinge, it's a nice contrast. So I think in this particular case, I think it looks good to leave some of the Panzer Gray showing through. I think that looks nice. I think it's a good contrast of colors. If you're doing a Panzer Yellow vehicle, maybe not so much. So I guess all I have to say is that I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have this nice artistic licensed Panzer Gray with a little bit of blue on there. And I'll be the first to admit it's artistic license, of course it is. But I'll take advantage of that from a color standpoint, and you know, leave a little bit more of the base color showing through than I might have on some of the other builds, or at least to be able to tell. And if I look at the main sprocket wheel here, you know, there's some dirt on there, but there's not a ton. And I haven't done the traditional leaking or busted gasket on one of the road wheels where I have some oil leaking out. I may go back and do one of them, but it might be nice to do a vehicle that doesn't have that. I mean, there's lots of pictures of vehicles in the field where there's no busted gaskets. But certainly based on some of the models I've done in the past, you would think that, you know, there was a big run on broken gaskets in the German army. But yeah, I think we might, maybe we'll skip it on this vehicle here. I don't know that it necessarily needs it, but that's going to be hard for me to do. So we'll, anyways, getting back to this, we'll let this dry up, and then we'll look at moving on and putting some further color by using some of the dark mud to give some depth. And then we'll look at doing some oil paints. So I'll show you how I did the top here of the mud guards and the fenders using my oil paints here. So we'll do the, so let's get to the mud. We'll take a minute and prep the tray off camera and get right back to it. Okay, so now we're going to start kind of creating some depth of color, or further depth of color here. So what I'm going to do is, again, and you can use, you know, there's any number of, probably this is the old 8K dark mud. I got this years and years and years ago. Well, what you're going to do is, towards the bottom of the vehicle, where you'd have more, you know, it would stay wet a little bit longer, I'm just going to just apply just like that. I'm just going to pick some. So what I thin it down, just it's a little bit thick out of the bottle. So I thin it down just a touch. Like that. And you may have to do several coats of this, or several applications of this, which is good because it builds things up gradually, which is what you want. I'm just going to feather it in back here. That's it. That's all you got to do. Now here, if there's a strong tide mark, which there may be, this is where you could do two ways. You could either blend it in with further pigments, just like we did the tide marks that we got from the X20 or the Fixer, or you can get a brush moistened with odorless thinner and kind of stipple it and blend it that way. So either way will work here. So we'll let that. How does that look? Oh, looks okay, I think. Let's go with the shock absorber here and give that some attention. And you can use these you know, these mud earth effects. You can use oil paints, thinned, of course. You know, if I wanted to, I could you know, I could apply. You know, why don't we go ahead and do that? So let's say I want to create some depth of color. So I'm going to use this dark brown. So I just pick up just a bit. Set that aside. And let's say I want to put some dark brown in here. Get a bit of a shadow. Or maybe, and then I kind of simulated that on the other side of the video. I'll show you in a minute, but maybe. And just, that's not going to cause me a problem. And then just blend it. I'm going to clean off my brush a little bit here, get most of it off. And just kind of stipple this. I can stipple it and just. Again, Mike Rinaldi, who I think is one of the best finishers, weathering guys out there. He uses nothing but oil paints. So if it works for him, and the beautiful work that he produces, certainly apply it here. You can just blend it in. Very random. And again, this stuff is random, right? It's not. There isn't a fixed way of doing this. It's whatever. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. So you can use either way. I mean, you could do nothing but the enamel products. You could do nothing but the oils. But that's how you create. So I'm just going to carry that forward the rest of the vehicle here. But let's dry this up and see what that looks like and see if we need to do any more. Okay, let's take a hairdryer to it. Okay, so while we're letting the what we did on the bottom there dry, so we said I wanted to show you what I did for kind of getting mud and whatnot on the tops. So I used 3 of these oil brush colors. So I have the dark brown that we use, and I've already applied in kind of a dot pattern the dark brown. I've got also the dusty earth. And again, these things are very convenient. So just touch. You just need a bit. That's way too much. Like that. That's more like a draw. And then again, rule of 3. This nice dark mud, which is kind of a mid-color, mid-brown between the dark brown and the dusty earth. Just apply that, and I'm just trying to create just a variation of color. Okay, and then what I do is right away, without letting these guys dry, is take, again, let's use this guy. Get most of the, and with a stippling, we just blend it in. My eyes on here, and just blend it in, like so. Just working away on it. So you just work it and see how I've worked it in here. And let's pick up some more thinner. Now, so this is fighting me a little bit more than well because of the texture of the tread plate here. But that's okay. It's nice because you can get some good effects in there. And then once it's blended to a point, and I might have a little bit more on the outside, a little bit less on the inside. I might take some off here. And by taking it off is simply just using more thinner. And you can see some of the gray is coming back here. Let's finish blending this. So similar to what we did on the Sherman, similar to what we did on the MX. And then what I do is pick up some pigment. Go back to my trusty pigment over here and start stippling that in, just like that. And maybe go a little bit thicker to the outside of the vehicle. like so. I just work that in here. Okay, so we're just continuing to work this in. Okay, so we're just again continuing to work in. I think that looks, so that'll dry, and it'll dry a little bit lighter as the pigments come back. And now if we look at the side here, I think we're pretty happy. So I like the effect in here. And then the only thing we have left to do is just to blend this in. Like that. There you go. And you can see that that just softens that a bit. And all I'm doing is just working pigment into here. There we go. So what I might do is, I like the effect I got with the oil paint. So what I might do is go back, but I think that's going to stay there. It looks like a nice, okay, so there's one blown gasket here, I guess. Can get away from it. But I think I like the way that looks. So I think we're done. So again, what we'll do is we'll continue to work in some of the pigments here. Just way too much. Let me get that off. Continue to work some of the pigments in on the side here, and then add oils and whatnot. But you get the same type of thing that you just want to kind of work in the, you know, the fact that the crew would be up and down on this, and any mud that would come down here would kind of get into these little crevices here. When Robert noticed off camera that here, so this is one of those nickel photo etched pieces, the guard here for the light. So it's a little bit chipped there, so we'll go back and fix that up off camera. So I might either just paint it gray, or maybe I'll use that opportunity and put a little bit of chipping on it. But I think we're pretty much done for today's episode. So the next time you see the vehicle, we'll have all of the road wheels on, so it'll be in the exact same state as this. We're gonna focus on finishing up. So I think there's one more episode to do here on finishing up this vehicle. We'll have we'll focus on putting on the tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prime these in a mixture of that black and mahogany Mr. Surfacer, and then we'll go at it, and the same type of thing we did in previous videos. We'll go at it with pigments, and take the old Mark 1 finger with some metal pigment and go after the raised edges here. So I think we're pretty close to being this done, and maybe we'll do a little bit of weathering on some of the horizontal. But again, we want to, you know, we don't want to lose too much of that nice modulation and whatnot that we have here. So I think we'll pretty much, I think one more episode, maybe two, and we're done with this guy. So yeah. So thanks again for hanging there with me today, and we'll look forward to catching up in the next episode.